paid for them through your tithes and offerings. They're in taxes 25. If they're free to come and ask for candy, you're free to give them a gospel tract. Okay? I think that's a fair trade. Give them some good candy, though. Make sure you do that. Well, we're in the midst of a series dealing with the commandments of Jesus. We've come across one today that's a little bit difficult to talk about because in speaking of it, it makes you judgmental. And because we're speaking about don't be judgmental. Jesus says, judge not. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, it talks about this. Let's read this together. We're studying the gospel. Matthew 7, 1 through 6, together. Judge not, that ye be not judged. For without judgment you judge, you will be judged. And when the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how do you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you to pieces. The Lord had His blessing for reading His word. I was talking to Debbie Johnson before we started the message. And she asked what the message was about, and I told her the judgmental attitude. She says she has a great magnet on her refrigerator that says, I can tell that people are judgmental just by looking at them. There's a little reading I found entitled, When I Got to Heaven, Authors Unknown. It goes like this. I was shocked, confused, bewildered as I entered heaven's door, not by the beauty of it all, by the lights or its decor. It was the folks in heaven who made me sputter and gasp. The thieves, the liars, the sinners, the alcoholics, the trash. There stood the kid from 7th grade who swiped my lunch money twice. Next to him was my old neighbor who never said anything nice. Her, who I always thought was rotting away in hell, was sitting pretty on cloud nine, looking incredibly well. I nudged Jesus, what's the deal? I would love to hear your take. How'd all these sinners get up here? God must have made a mistake. And why is everybody so quiet, so somber? Give me a clue. Hush, child, said he. They're all in shock. No one thought they'd see you. We are quick to judge, while at the same time justifying ourselves in the midst of all things. Judging is like the nuclear fuel at a reactor. If handled correctly and in a proper fashion, it can be very helpful. But if you handle it wrong, things go wrong. People get hurt. And you yourself are in the midst of it. We need to understand that inappropriate judgment, there is a time to judge. But we better not be the basis of it on our own merit, but on God's word. But when inappropriate judgment occurs, we actually incur judgment upon ourselves. One pastor I was reading, he assumed that he was not very judgmental. But he said, I decided to keep record of every time I passed judgment on somebody during the week. So this is what he said. Judging others is fun. Judging others makes you feel good.
And I'm not sure I've gone a single day without this sin. In any given week, I might condemn my son, my daughter, even my dog gets the hammer of condemnation. I watch the news and condemn those idiotic people who do such things. Most reality TV shows are full of people I can judge as sinful, ignorant, stupid, arrogant, or just childish. I get in my car and drive and find a host of inept drivers who should have flunked their driving test. And I throw a little condemnation on our Department of Public Safety for good measure. At the store, I complain to myself about the lack of organization makes it impossible to find what I'm looking for. And why can't that teenage checker, what is she wearing? Focus and work so we can get out of here. Judging is one of our favorite pastimes. We are quick to condemn. We are quick to hold people to a standard that we would revile if we were held at that standard. But we're quick to do it. We become the judge and jury and put down everyone else as failures who fail to meet the standards that we ourselves cannot keep. Jesus tells us, don't do that. Don't judge other people. And by that, he means to condemn. It doesn't mean to discern sin, because we are told to discern sin. And when we see a brother sin, we're to go to them and help them. But we don't sit as judge and jury on them. That's God's business. That's not ours. When we look at the commands of Jesus, Jesus specifically says, don't judge. Don't condemn other people, because in so doing you're condemning yourself, because you do the very things. Maybe not in that way, maybe in attitude, but we all sit there. Today we want to recover just a little bit of the understanding of what it means to judge and the dangers we have in judging other people. I want to look at first the example of Job. In Job, we have the classic example of people judging Job. Now, you understand the background of Job. God and Satan are meeting one day, and God says, look down at Job. And Satan says, well, if you weren't protecting him, he'd curse you. God says, okay, you can test him. You know what happened? Satan took his wealth, took all his children, took his health, and he was left there in despair. What had he done wrong? Huh? And the answer is, he found the pleasure of God. That's what he did wrong. That's the only thing he did wrong. And yet what happened? People came. They came to encourage him. And he had friends that came and played God with him, who were able to tell him everything he thought, everything that he did, though they knew nothing. They judged him, they condemned him, and left him without. And Job had done nothing except find the pleasure of God. And his friends that came to help him, all they did by pointing fingers at Job were actually condemning themselves. You look at his three friends. Their judgment of Job. You know, they started out pretty good, didn't they? They came and sat with him for a while in silence. And if the story had ended there, we'd say, hallelujah. What a good group of guys. I mean, here they are. They loved Job and they cared for Job. And they just wanted to help and encourage him. They suffered with him in silence. But they didn't stop there. In typical Peterine fashion, they opened mouth and inserted both feet. I relate to that, because I do that too often. Not only did they have to come and sit with him, but then they had to tell him why he was suffering. Gang, that's dangerous. I have learned over the years when people come and explain their situation, not to tell them why they're in the situation they're in. Because very seldom do I really understand the situation. These three had no idea what was going on. But they were quick to pass judgment. They understood his problem. They knew exactly what God was thinking. They knew exactly what Job had done. And they knew nothing. They knew nothing. When we experience people in pain, you don't have to explain the pain to them. When people says, why am I going through such things? You know what I tell them? I don't know. Because I don't. Yeah, they may have contributed something to it. Maybe they're living out their consequences. I can discern some of that. But I am very careful not to tell them why, like Job's three friends. Look at their conclusions. This is what they concluded. Eliphaz, he says, Job, you're receiving God's anger. Was that true? No. No, he wasn't experiencing God's anger. He was experiencing Satan's anger because God was pleased with Job. He got it all backwards. He was totally and completely wrong. Then you look at Bildad. He says, Job, you sinned, and because you sinned, all this has happened to you. Wrong. Job hadn't sinned. It was Satan's attack. It was Satan's accusation. God trusted and believed in Job. You look at Zophar. He says, Job, you're just receiving God's righteous judgment. God wouldn't be doing this to you unless you had sinned, and therefore he's just delivering what you deserve. Wait a second. We know the story from God's perspective. That's not the case. Job didn't appreciate this. As a matter of fact, he didn't sit quietly and take the accusation. Job had the tendency to be loud. He got up and he said, I've done nothing wrong. I want an audience before God. God, tell me why you're doing this. Oh, by the way, God never answered that question. God did come and talk to him. He never answered why. You know what that teaches me? Often in the midst of suffering, we'll never know why. We may never know. Our responsibility is to trust God and believe God regardless of the circumstances. And so he was frustrated by his friends and his accusation. He was frustrated by his circumstances. He was frustrated, yes, with God. But in all of it, he never forsook God. He continued to say, I know that my Redeemer lives. I know, and I know the day of resurrection is coming. He believed that. He never gave up. Job wasn't one who suffered quietly in the presence of his friends. He threw it right back on them. It's interesting when I look at the similarity between Job's friends and us. You know, it reminds me of the disciples. Do you remember in John chapter 9? Oh, they were quick to judge. Here was a man blind from birth. And so they asked Jesus, who sinned? This man or his parents that he should be blind? What a condemning attitude. And what did Jesus say to them? You idiots. No, he didn't use that word. That's the word I would have used. You idiots. Nobody sinned, but that the God might be glorified. That's why this man is blind. And then he healed him. We're just the same way. We are so quick to pass judgment and condemnation and to know the mind of God. It's our nature. We jump to conclusions. Because somebody's car broke down and they must have cursed God somewhere along the way. I mean, we're always there with an answer for God. I think what happened is we become too busy being fruit inspectors in the lives of other people. And we evaluate their fruit. They're not fruity enough, or their fruit is different from mine, and therefore it must be something different. And we become so callous, so judgmental. God stepped in the midst of this situation with Job. And God evaluated their judgment. You know what He did? With the judgment you judge, you'll be judged. So God judged them. And He told them, you're wrong. You're wrong. Whoa. They thought they knew God. They thought they knew everything. And God stood up and said, forget it. I'm going to give to you what I gave what you are accusing Job of, unless Job intercedes for me, to me for you. And so they had to experience God's judgment, except God was gracious to them because Job, because he was a friend, prayed for them and forgave them. Wow. Wow. Because they judged, God judged. And because Job was gracious, God was gracious. Boy, that's a way to deal with things, isn't it? To be gracious and allow God to be gracious too. We really lack the ability to judge. We are in no position to evaluate the merits, the character of another person and lay down judgment because of them. Do you know why? Because of the mote in our eye. The sin, the problems that we have, and they so cloud what we see that we can't see our problems bigger than other people's. It reminds me of the woman that ran into this doctor's office, saw a guy in his lab coat, ran up to him and says, Doctor, frankly, tell me, what's wrong with me? And the man says, well, first, you're too fat. Second, your clothes are too loud. Third, your makeup is all wrong. And fourth, I'm a photographer. The doctor is on the next floor up. Or how about the little girl that was crying on a train, sitting next to her dad, and she cried for hours. And finally, one of the passengers, who was just so upset, came over and said, would you shut that girl up? Give her to her mother. And the man looked at her and said, I can't. Her mother's in the boxcar in a casket. You see, we're quick to jump and quick to condemn. There's an old saying, never judge another person until you've walked a month in their moccasins. We have so many issues that we should be very careful about judging others. I think one of the major reasons is our faulty perceptions. We don't see things right. The mote has blinded us. And there's lots of different ways that we could talk about this. The faulty perceptions that we see cloud our vision so that we don't understand what's going on. And we become negative. And our perception gets warped because of it. Here's some things that I see as I look through and evaluate faulty perceptions. The first thing I think is we exaggerate the faults of others while at the same time ignoring our own faults. We're prone to exaggerate. They are always so negative. Always? Always? in every circumstance and situation? Or does it mean I've seen them in a couple of negative situations and therefore I just expand upon it? So that way they look worse than they are and I look better than I am because they're so horrible, so horrendous. Most of us magnify the negativity of others. We make it bigger. We blow it out of proportion. And what we have to understand is that we need to look on the positive things of others, not on the negative. Yeah, if things are bad in situations and there needs to be discernment and exhortation in those things, we deal with them. But don't make them worse than they are. Don't exaggerate. Because in making their speck look like a plank, we ignore the plank in our own eye. I think another thing is we have a tendency to remember the faults of others. We forget their good points. All we can remember is the bad things that have done. You know, the Apostle James in his epistle tells us that we're not to do this. In James 4, 1 through 5, he talks about our quarrels and conflicts. Why do we have quarrels and conflicts? Because we're focusing and remembering the faults. We don't forgive. We hang on to the faults of others because by hanging on to the faults of others, it makes us better because they're so horrible. And what we have to do is forgive. Because if we don't forgive, how can we expect God to forgive us? I think we're very quick to be absolute as well. We don't have any gray matters that come into our life. It's right, it's wrong. That's the way it is. Boy, is that the way God is. Do you remember when David was hungry and he had his troops with him and they went to the priest and the priest gave him sanctified bread which only the priest could eat? What happened? God was pleased. He never condemns him. But what would we have done? Oh my goodness, you have violated the sanctuary. Yeah, but God says it's only the priest. You ever think God makes exceptions? Yes, He makes exceptions. Can you? Or does everything have to be black and white? Can't there be some things in which it doesn't have to be my way? God never condemned David for eating the bread, nor should we condemn others for doing good things. I think a fourth thing is we have a tendency to jump to conclusions. I have done this so many times, and I'm sure you probably never have, but you know, I hear something and I immediately see the conclusion and see the problem, and what I find is maybe that I don't know the whole story. And maybe if I would just sit there and listen, instead of jumping to conclusion and having the conclusion made up before it even starts. Maybe we've had a bad experience and somebody begins something, and because of our bad experience, we just extrapolate it out to what we experienced. And it's nothing like what they're going through. That's our tendency. And this relates to the next thing. Sometimes we assume the same as past experience. We've had a hurtful encounter, and therefore when that same person comes up who hurt us before, what do we automatically say? They're going to hurt us again. Really? Yeah, it could. I understand that. It could happen. But why do we automatically assume it's going to be negative? It's our sin nature. We expect the negative. And by the way, there is such a thing as self-fulfilling prophecy, which means you expect it to be negative, therefore you manipulate the circumstances until it's negative, and you can say, see, I was right after all. We assume the same. We can't expect and won't expect something different. I think along with this as well, we sometimes project our feelings onto another. For instance, you're feeling resentful, and you see someone who's sad for whatever reason, and we look at them and say, oh, they're resentful. What are we doing? We're projecting our feelings onto them because that's what we feel. Or if we were in their circumstance, that's the way we feel. But I have found that people in different circumstances or circumstances that I have experienced don't always have the same emotions and feelings I have. They react differently. They react godly. And I'm surprised because I didn't act godly. What we need to do is have correct understanding. We need to be very, very slow in condemning and judging others. I like what F.B. Meyer said. He once said that when we see a brother or sister in sin, there are two things we do not know. First, we do not know how hard he or she tried to not sin. And second, we do not know the power of the forces that assailed him or her. He also said, we also do not know what we would have done in the same circumstance. Be careful about judging others. Give love. Give grace. Give mercy. That's what God expects of us. Seek out the sinner to save the sinner, not condemn the sinner. We're not there to throw rocks at others. We're there to come alongside and help them through circumstances and situations. If we discern biblical sin, then we're there to help them through the sin, not throw rocks. Well, how's my life going to be different? Well, I think there are a number of things that we can do regarding a judgmental attitude. The first is, let's focus on the most important things in life. Focus on the fundamentals, the things that we can agree on. Do you remember how Paul, writing to the Romans and writing to the Corinthians, how he had to correct attitudes? Do y'all remember that? If you read, and he dealt with them, and he dealt with them. Now, was he condemning them? No, he was trying to help them through it. John Piper, in his writings, he points out that Paul is not just offering some insights into clearing up some relational bumps in writing to the church at Rome and Corinth. Instead, Paul is elevating things immensely by trying our care for fellow believers to the weightiest truths about Christ. You know, when he was talking about meat offered to idols, is that really what's important? A hunk of cow? Or is it love for the brethren and willingness to forgive and tolerate and get along and show love? So that's the most important thing. To focus on love for the brethren instead of petty differences. And rather than fighting about things, loving each other. It's a whole lot nicer to love each other than hate each other, by the way. Too many emotions to carry. Too many grudges to carry. It's weighty. Love. Focus on the fundamentals of faith. Loving God and loving each other. Loving them. Not throwing rocks at them. Loving them. Don't make mountains out of molehills. I think a second thing we have to do is we have to analyze our attitudes. Again in Romans 14:10, Paul turned to Romans and says, why do you look down on your brothers? Do you know what looking down means? It's getting snobby. It means I'm elevated. I'm better. I'm gooder. That's Arkansas English. I'm gooder than you. It's being haughty and proud. It's being arrogant. He says, why do you display that attitude with others? Why are you so haughty? Why are you judging others and elevating yourself to that position? DeWitt Talmage once remarked, without exception, the people who have the greatest number of faults are themselves the most merciless in their criticism of others. You know when I can tell a person has a major problem with an issue? When they have a major issue with people who have the same issue. I mean, they blow it out. They're screaming. The people that holler and scream about something all the time, you know what I'm almost always assured of? It's the issue they're dealing with, or the issue they're refusing to deal with in their own life. Those who scream the loudest tend to be the ones who have the biggest problems. And they need to learn. It's like the guy who's driving to his office and he comes in the office madder than a wet setting hen. He comes in, he says, I was driving into work and I noticed in my rear view mirror this woman driving 65 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. And she sped up to me and I looked and she was putting on her eye makeup. It so distracted me that I dropped my electric razor and knocked a donut out of my hand. And then it made me swerve, and I had to grab the steering wheel with both hands instead of my knees, which upset the phone in my ear, which dropped into my coffee on my lap. That woman, what's her problem? You get the drift? We've got to stop judging those who sin, because in so doing, what are we doing? I refer back to F.B. Meyer. What did he say? Do you remember? When we see a brother or sister in sin, we do not know how hard he or she's tried not to sin. We don't know the power of the forces that set against him or her. And we don't know what we would have done in the same situation. Don't judge. Why? Because our own judgment is coming. Every one of us is going to be judged. Now, I understand that there's two judgments. The judgments of Christians and the judgment of non-Christians. Non-Christians' judgment will be regarding their eternal state, heaven or hell. And because they don't believe, they will spend eternity separated from God in the lake of fire. For Christians, we're going to be judged, not in regard to our eternal state, that's guaranteed with Jesus, but our reward at the bema seat. Our judgment is coming. In Romans 14, again, it says, so then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. In that passage, 3 times, it emphasizes the fact we're all going to be judged. Every one of us. So if you're going to be judged for your actions, your attitudes, and all these other things, you know what I want to say? Be careful how you judge others, because God's going to judge you just like Job's friends. With the judgment you judge, that's how God's going to deal with you. Be careful about condemning others. What we have to learn is the Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates was a 5th century man who is considered the father of modern medicine. And one of the things that he said in the Hippocratic Oath is this: I will do no harm or injustice to them, the patients. Doctors are supposed to fulfill this oath today. I will do no harm. They're not supposed to hurt you, they're supposed to help you. That's the way it should be in the Christian life. You're there to help, not hurt. And when you criticize and condemn and judge, and we're quick to do it, all we're doing is harming them and harming ourselves. Do no harm. Don't hurt people. Don't be quick with the tongue to put them down and put them in their place. Extend grace and mercy like Jesus has extended to us. Judge not. Don't judge, that you be not judged. Would you join me in prayer?